in Filth it will be found.
So, and only inside of that does rationality operate, with all of those underlying predicates. And the rationality has to be informed by the body and by the motivations and by the emotions for it to even operate. So the existentialists are correct about that, to deny rationality as the fundamental principle of orientation. That doesn't mean that irrationality is the right approach. It means that rationality has to be augmented by other elements of being, elements of subjective being. And that's akin to the psychoanalytic viewpoint too, that you have to integrate your drives and emotions, especially anger and sexuality, into your personality, and also akin to Piaget's idea that the sub-personalities, the reflexes and so forth, have to be, you know, have to be organized into a playable game so that everything is working in harmony. Here's a funny way of looking at it. So let's say you fall right into that hole that's underneath everything, and you've hit an anomaly that you don't understand. You say, what's that anomaly made out of? Exactly. I know that's a strange way of thinking about it, you know, because it's not, well, you could say, we'll just go along with that. It's a metaphor. What's that anomaly made out of? Well, here's a way of thinking about it. It's made out of spirit and matter. And here's why. This is something I learned in part from Piaget. He said, well, it's made out of matter because, of course, that's the world, matter. And the world is also what matters. And so that's kind of a nice duality there. But it's made out of spirit because when you encounter something anomalous and go down the rabbit hole, when you go into the underworld that's underneath everything that you've relied on, you learn things down there. So what's down there is information. And that now it's maybe way more information than you want, but it is information. It's information. And what can you do with the information? You can inform yourself with the information, right? You can put yourself in formation with the information. That's helpful too. And so, and you think, well, you're a psyche. Maybe you're not a spirit. It depends on, you know, whether you're a materialist or not, but at least we can say that you're a psyche. The question is, what's your psyche made of? Well, it's obviously got a material substrate. But the matter happens to be arrayed in a particular order, and that's an information order. And so when you fall into the underworld that's underneath everything and you encounter that latent information, then what you can do is enhance your psyche. You can grow your spirit, because what you do is you take the new information and you incorporate it. That's like eating the apple that Adam and Eve ate. You incorporate that, and that makes more of you. And that's not a metaphorical or a metaphysical proposition. It's to say nothing other than, well, that's what happens when children learn. All right, so you're on your way to, see, you remember you've all probably watched Pinocchio or know about it. One of the things that happens that's really cool in Pinocchio is that when Geppetto decides that he wants his puppet to be a genuine autonomous being, he wishes upon a star. It's a very strange thing, but everybody just swallows it because we don't notice when we're swallowing things that are completely preposterous. You know, it's this animated puppeteer wishes on a star that his puppet is going to become real, and everybody nods their head and goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense at all, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't make the sort of sense that we normally associate with sense. It makes a kind of meta sense, and everybody understands it. So this is what Geppetto's doing, is he's elevating his eyes above the horizon, so out of the realm of the worldly, let's say, to the transcendent. And the transcendent will say, for all intents and purposes, you can see the transcendent spread above you in the heaven that arches over us. It's close enough for our purposes. And there's a star there, and a star is something that's eternal, that shines in the darkness. And so Geppetto makes an agreement with the transcendent. He says, look, I'm willing to do whatever it takes that my creation becomes autonomous. Well, that's exactly this situation that you want to set up for yourself. Is like, okay, you've got to figure out what star you're going to orient yourself by. And you have to ask yourself, like no one's ever asked you, okay, if you had the choice to make your life worth living, what's your price? What do you need? Just find out, first of all. You just ask. You'll tell yourself, like, you'll be afraid because you thought, I'll never get that. It's like, well, lower your sights a little bit then, you know. Don't ask for a 80-foot super yacht in like 6 months. That just means you're stupid. You know, it doesn't mean, you're not, you know, first of all, it's not going to make you happy anyways. You know, it's just not, it's not wise. You're supposed to be asking yourself this question like you're someone you care about. So you imagine you're talking to some 12-year-old kid that you kind of like. Think, oh, it wouldn't be so bad if this 12-year-old kid had a decent life. So you too, it's like, it wouldn't be so bad. The universe wouldn't mind if you had a decent life. If there was a little less suffering on your part, especially if you didn't, foist it off on other people. If there was a little less suffering on your part and you made things a little better everywhere you went, it's like the universe would probably be okay with that. So I think you could get away with it if you were sort of quiet about it. And so, ask yourself, okay, so then once you've established your target and you know where you are, then you know what's good for you, because that moves you along. And that happens at a perceptual level. You don't have to think about it anymore. And the experimental literature on that's already quite clear. So for example, if I specify that podium as the target for my action, then I'm happy when I'm walking towards it, because there it is and everything cooperating really nicely. But if I specify going to the exit sign that you guys can't see, that this is an obstacle in the front of, then as soon as I specify that, then that's an annoying obstacle. And that's precognitive. It happens immediately. It happens instantaneously. And so it really is the case that your being manifests itself inside these frames. And so what's so cool about that is you can change the frame. It doesn't mean you can like juggle planets or anything like that, but it does give you quite a scope of what? Untrammeled action within the world. And if the frame isn't working out, then you can tweak it, or sometimes you have to make a major adjustment in it, whatever. You don't have to stick to the damn thing like it's the ideology that you're going to die for. It's a tentative plan. It's a work in progress. And that's, with the future authoring program, one of the things I recommend for people is that they should do it badly. Because you're not going to get it right anyways, but a reasonable plan is way better than no plan. Plus, a reasonable plan is a plan that has built into it the processes that will enable the plan to get better as you implement it. So you're a medical school student, you write your MCATs, which is this test you have to write to go to medical school, you get 25th percentile. I don't know who you are, but you're not a pre-med student. And maybe you never were, right? And that's the rub, man. And so, who the hell are you? You don't know. Collapse down here into this motivational conflict, this place of motivational and emotional uncertainty and tremendous information, right? It's a place of transformation. It's the phoenix that burns. It's the burning part of the phoenix that burns. It's the journey to the underworld. It's the journey to hell. It can really be a journey to hell, because you may find out that the reason that your partner betrayed you or that you didn't get your damn promotion is because there's seriously something wrong with you. And you know it. And I don't just mean that you don't know what you're doing. I mean that there's 25% of you that is seriously aiming at things not being good. And so you fall into the underworld and you find out that, uh-oh, God, I just got exactly what I was aiming for. Or I got exactly what the worst part of me was aiming for. And that worst part, that's something to clean up, and that's not going to be easy, because it's got its hooks in me like something ferocious, something seriously ferocious. And I've been toying with it for a very long time, and maybe I can't even detach it anymore. And so that's not so fun. And you see people like that in psychotherapy very frequently, or you see them wandering around on the streets like absolute catastrophic former shells of themselves, because they've hit the underworld and they ended up in hell and there's no getting out of it. And so those are the people you tend to give a wide berth to when you walk down the street. So there you are, down in the underworld, right? Back where the latent information exists, and just too much of it. And that's this. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And that's why the Adam and Eve story is archetypal, right? Because we're always ingesting something new that knocks us into a new state of self-consciousness. And it's always a catastrophic demolition of our previous paradise. Insufficient as that paradise was, something comes along to destroy it and knocks the slats out of our life. And that's a voyage to the underworld. Out of the walled garden into chaos. And all you have to do is attend to what matters. And your whole nervous system it's doing this for you. You've got a goal, something happens, it matters. So what are you supposed to do with that? You're supposed to fix it. You're supposed to engage with it. That's why it's calling out to you as if it matters. It's saying there's an indeterminate part of the world here that wants to manifest itself into fully articulated being. And it's calling to you to do that. And if you ignore it, then it accumulates. And if it accumulates, it turns into the dragon of chaos. And then it waits until you're not at your best, and then it eats you. And that's the alternative. So that seems like a bad plan.
Hi there. This is my message to millennials about how to change the world. And I would say how to change the world properly. And on the side of truth, he puts a philosopher named John Stuart Mill, an English philosopher, who said, "He who knows only his side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion." And it's part of what Piaget, the developmental psychologist Piaget, called the messianic stage. And there's some real utility in that, because we're social creatures, and as we construct ourselves and formulate ourselves and bring our own character into being, predicated on our biological platform, our biological being, we also simultaneously have to adjust to integrate with and negotiate with society, which sometimes needs to be changed. The structure of society has to be preserved, but it has to be updated and improved as it moves forward. And so part of the problem is how to update and improve it without doing that so rapidly that you destroy everything of any value. He said, the line between good and evil runs down every human's heart. So the real battle, as far as I'm concerned, and I think this goes along with the tradition in which John Stuart Mill is firmly placed in, is that to overcome tyranny and malevolence and chaos and nihilism and the desire to bring everything to a halt, you have to repair the fissures and the rift that's in your own soul, basically. And that means that you have to confront the evil that lives in your own heart. And there's a statement from the New Testament that I think is very much apropos with regards to this particular idea. And this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is a central text in the Western tradition. I would say obviously central to Christianity, but central to everything that Western civilization has built. And so Christ says to his followers, "Why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull out the mote out of thine eye? And behold, a beam is in thine own eye. Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast the mote out of thy brother's eye." Well, I like that quote because it places the responsibility for change at every level of being on the individual. And obviously the individual interacts with society, but the idea here is that unless the individual straightens out his or her own soul, there's no possibility that the impact the individual can have on society can be anything but say harmful in proportion to the harm that's still in the soul. These are important things to know. They're vitally important things to know. But then we're faced with the conundrum that young people also want to change the world. But that's no problem, because I think you can bring Truth University together with the desire to make real change. But change has to start in the right place. So I'm going to tell you how I think you should change yourself so that you can change the world. And so that the world that you bring into being will be a better world and not a worse one. So, all right, so what should you do about that? Well, here's an idea. The first thing you have to do is orient yourself. Now, you probably have all watched Pinocchio, and Pinocchio is about how a marionette, someone whose strings are being pulled by forces beyond his comprehension. That's the situation of the undeveloped individual. Geppetto, who's a benevolent father, so a benevolent symbol of benevolent culture, makes a puppet, his son, and then wishes on a star. Now, a star is something that glitters up in the sky, and it's associated with the transcendent and the beyond and the divine. And if you look up in the night sky and it's very dark, you get a feeling of awe. It's because you're confronting your soul, so to speak. Your individual soul is confronting the cosmos, and you can feel a relationship between you and the totality. So looking up into the sky is like a religious experience if it's a starry sky. And to wish upon a star is to find a light that orients you like the North Star, and to pick the highest goal you can conceive of. And so that's what Geppetto does. He raises his eyes above his day-to-day concerns and tries to establish a relationship with the highest of all possible values. And he has the most profound of wishes, and the most profound of wishes is that the puppet that he's created could become a genuine individual, a genuinely, fully developed human being. And that's what you can wish for yourself. You can wish and aim for that in yourself. And then, you see, that's how you deal with the suffering that's attendant on life, because life is suffering, and because life is very hard, and people get sick, and they become mentally ill, and there's malevolence in the world, and there's tragedy, and so life is very, very hard. And if you're not properly oriented with regards to life, the fact that it's hard and the fact that it's full of suffering can warp and twist and bend you until you become murderous and resentful, and even go beyond murderous and resentment to wish for genocide, and even to wish for the destruction of everything. And so you have to learn how to strengthen yourself as an individual so that you can bear the burden of being without becoming corrupt. You have to decide that that is what you're aiming for, is that you want to become a fully developed human being and stop being a pathetic marionette whose strings are being pulled by horrible forces behind the scenes. So I would say to wish on a star is to aim at the highest good. And the question then is, well, what is the good? Well, we can answer that in two ways. We could say that the good is the opposite of evil. And I can tell you what evil is. Evil is the conscious desire to produce suffering where suffering is not necessary. And so if you read about what happened in the Nazi concentration camps, for example, or in the Russian concentration camps during the time of the Soviet Union, you get a good flavor for what constitutes evil. And evil is the desire to exploit the vulnerability of other people, to self-consciously exploit the vulnerability of other people, and to elevate their suffering beyond their or anyone's ability to tolerate. And so the good is the opposite of that, whatever the opposite of that is. The good is harder to get a handle on. But here's one hint, and I got this from reading Jean Piaget, partly, who's a developmental psychologist. And Piaget talked about the equilibrated state, and an equilibrated state is like a game that children play, where every child wants to play the game. You have a little social group, and that's the children's play group, and you have the individuals within it. Those are the individual children, and the structure is the game. And it's a good game if everyone wants to play it. And Piaget noted that a game like that will outperform a game that people have to be tyrannized to play, because it doesn't require any enforcement cost. And so I've sort of developed the idea of an equilibrated state to think that if you're aiming at the good, then you want what's good for you. And I mean good for you as if you were taking care of yourself and were good to yourself, were treating yourself like someone you loved, that was good for you in a way that would also be good for your family. And then it would be good for you and your family in a way that was also good for society. And then it would be good for you and your family and society in a way that would be good for the world. And then it would be good now, and it would be good next week and the week after, and a year from now, and as long into the future as you can see. So the good is something that's equilibrated across multiple levels of being in multiple time frames simultaneously. And it isn't necessarily that you know what that is going to be at any given moment, but you can orient yourself so that's the state that you want to exist in. And I can tell you, as far as I can tell, when you exist in that state, even moment by moment, your life is imbued with a sense of meaning, and that sense of meaning can help you transcend suffering. The philosopher Nietzsche said, "He who has a why can bear any how. He who has a why can bear any how." And so Nietzsche's idea was that if there was purpose in your life of sufficient grandeur, that not only could the suffering in life be accepted, but maybe it could even be appreciated. Like it could be that you're willing to bear the burden of being because of the exciting things that you can do with being, the things you can build, and the things that you can bring about. And that might be the highest imaginable state of being, and that's a form of paradise. But it's not a paradise that you attain by transforming others. It's a paradise that you attain by transforming yourself. And that's a very difficult thing to do, and it's a very frightening thing to do, because it means that you're retooling your soul, and that's a job for that's the job for a forthright and honorable person. And it's an exciting enough task so that it will keep you occupied for the rest of your life, and then magical things will happen to you while you're doing it. And the world will arrange itself around you in the most wonderful way, in a musical way, so that every part of what you're experiencing plays off against every other part in a manner that has meaning embedded in every aspect of it. And you experience that, by the way. You experience that when you listen to a piece of music that you love. Music represents that, and that's why music nourishes the soul, why it's the highest form of art, at least in my opinion. So you have to live your life as if being is a symphony, and you're playing your instrumental part. Once you orient yourself, then you have an obligation, I would say an obligation to the development of your soul to speak the truth. You have to be oriented properly, though, because the truth is something that exists in service to an ideal of sorts. Then you can imagine that you could use your language two ways. You can use your language to manipulate the world and to extract from it what you want. So, for example, maybe you go out on a date with someone and you decide that the end goal of the date is to have a sexual partner for the night, and then you can craft your language to manipulate the person into providing you with what you want. And that's like an instrumental use of language. But the problem with that, there's many problems with that, but one of them is that what if your idea about what you should want is wrong? Like maybe that's not the way to treat someone that you're on a date out on a date with. Maybe you're minimizing and reducing the interactions between you from what could be a healthy and elevated state of interaction and discourse to something that's basically the pursuit of impulsive pleasure. And maybe that's not good for you next week and the week after and a month down the road. Maybe orienting yourself towards impulsive pleasure is a very bad idea. Remember what happens in Pinocchio. Pinocchio goes to Pleasure Island, and Pleasure Island is a place where impulsive pleasures can be had at a moment's notice. But what Pinocchio discovers, along with Jiminy Cricket, that Pleasure Island is run by masked totalitarians. They're all dressed in black, you remember, and they're turning the children and adolescents who are on Pleasure Island, they're depriving them of their voice, turning them into braying jackasses and preparing to sell them as slaves to the salt mines. And so there's an implication in that story that the pursuit of impulsive pleasure is one route to totalitarianism and slavery, and I believe that. So perhaps orienting your language towards the gathering of impulsive pleasure is a misuse of your highest gift, the gift of logos, the gift of communication. The alternative is to orient yourself towards the highest good, as we already described, and then speak the truth. And you can tell when you're doing that or you can tell when you're not doing that, because if you're not telling the truth, if you're using someone else's words, you're being manipulated in a sense by forces that are behind the scenes. You're not using your own words. You're the puppet of an ideology or another thinker or your own impulsive desires. And you can tell when you're speaking like that because it makes you feel weak. It makes you feel weak and ashamed. And you can localize that feeling physiologically. If you listen to yourself talk, you can tell when you're speaking properly, you will experience a feeling of integration and strength. And when you're speaking in a deceitful or manipulative manner, you'll feel that you're starting to come apart at the seams. And what you need to do is practice only saying things that make you feel stronger. And that'll mean, to begin with, that you'll notice that almost everything you say is a lie. It's either a lie or someone else's words. It's very hard to find your own words, but you don't actually exist until you have your own words. So then you try to teach yourself how to speak your own truth, and you listen to other people while you're doing that, because they can help you shape and correct your words. They'll react to them badly if you formulate your ideas badly, and if you listen and pay attention, then you can learn to formulate your words more and more clearly and accurately, and that makes you more and more powerful. It gives you more and more authority, which is the beneficial form of power. Okay, so you do that, and then you have to make a decision of faith, and that's basically, that you can either use your language to manipulate the world and make it do what you want, or you can use your language to try to articulate the truth as carefully as you possibly can, and then you can see what happens. You have to let go of your desire for the consequences that you want. You have to assume that if you speak the truth, the results are the best that is possible under the circumstances. And so it's an exciting way of living in some sense. It's like continually walking off a cliff, because you don't know what's going to happen next if all you do is say what you think. And maybe you're at work and you say what you think and you get fired and you think, oh my God, that's a terrible catastrophe. But maybe it's not, because maybe if you're working somewhere and you have to lie to maintain your job, maybe you shouldn't be there. Maybe it's deadening your soul and damaging you in some permanent manner and making you corrupt. And so you have to orient yourself. You have to speak the truth as carefully as you can. You have to listen to others so that you correct your speech. And then you have to allow the consequences that ensue to unfold as they will. That's the ultimate act of faith, I would say. And that's what you do if you belong to Truth University. That's one way of thinking about it. And so if you educate yourself, and this is a really good place to start, if you read these authors, then you'll know what else to read. If you read these authors, it'll take you a good long time, and it will be very, very hard on you, and you won't be the same person when you come out, and that's very frightening. And because being torn down and rebuilt is no joke, but it beats the hell out of the alternative, which is just to stagnate and stay a stagnant infant, which is not something I recommend. There's nothing uglier than a stagnant 40-year-old infant. So that's equivalent, just so you know, to Pinocchio. Back to the Pinocchio story, rescuing Geppetto from the underworld. Remember when he had kind of turned into a half jackass after being at Pleasure Island, where he was enticed, by the way, from a couple of people that was the fox and the cat, who attempted to entice himself into believing that he was a victim and needed a vacation. So Pinocchio was enticed onto Pleasure Island by two figures that played on his sense of victimization and neurosis and suffering to convince him that he didn't have to take any responsibility for his own existence, and he could just busy himself with impulsive pleasures, right? That's how he fell into the hands of the totalitarians on Pleasure Island. Anyways, Pinocchio, after he left Pleasure Island, had to go into the ocean twice, and the second time he went into the ocean, he was looking for his father. Well, everyone's father, from a mythological perspective, is dying in the underworld, in the chaos, because everyone inhabits a culture that's sick and old, so to speak. And it's sick and old because it was made by the dead. And the living have to revivify it continually in order for it to be a dynamic force. And the living have to revivify their connection with the culture internally too, because you're constructions of culture, although not only constructions of culture. And you have to understand history, because otherwise you can't understand yourself. You're a historical creature. And so you have to rescue your dead father from the belly of the beast, from the dragon. Because remember, the whale in Pinocchio is also a fire-breathing dragon. And that means you have to face the thing that you most fear. And when you do that, you'll rescue your father from the underworld. These are very complex ideas, and you can read about them in my book, Maps of Meaning, if you want. It's on the reading list. I put a free copy of it on jordanbpeterson.com so you can download it. I take apart these sorts of things in detail. So anyways, you have to revivify your father before you can become real. And that's part of the problem with the feminist and social justice warrior insistence on the existence of the patriarchy. It's like everyone's known since the beginning of time that culture is corrupt and tyrannical, but it's also protective and benevolent. Even the language you use is a product of culture. And so you don't overthrow the patriarchy, you revivify your culture. And you do that by adopting responsibility for your own being and then acting as a moral agent in the culture. That's what you do to become educated. So read these books. Read these books. They'll change your life. I guarantee it. They'll change your life. They'll take you apart. They'll devastate you. And then they'll rebuild you into something far greater than you are now. And those even help you overcome your own doubts, right? It's not only to argue against other people. It's to argue against the chattering demons of nihilism and hopelessness and ideological possession that exist in your mind and in society simultaneously. You need powerful weapons to fight back against those. Whatever direction is away from that is a good direction. And then you also want to contemplate what the highest possible good could look like for you and your family and your society. We already discussed that. And then you need to speak the truth in relationship to that. And then you need to educate yourself. And then you need to shoulder your responsibility. Responsibility is a good thing because it makes you strong. To bear up under it makes you strong. You can turn yourself into you can free yourself from your strings and turn yourself into a genuine individual. And then you can shoulder the world. And then you're in a position to make change. As a person like that, your mere being will change the world in a positive direction. And that's what you should be aiming for. So read the books that I put up on my site and do the future authoring program. And that will improve your life dramatically. And that's how you can change the world. What do you think about Ellis Miller and her thesis that most psychological diseases and aberrant behavior are the result of some kind of childhood trauma? Some are. But some forms of childhood trauma are also a consequence of psychological diseases and aberrant behavior. So this is very, very complicated. I'm more on the existentialist front with regards to these sorts of theories. So Ellis Miller's thesis is basically Freud's thesis. Freud certainly posited that many forms of psychological distress were a consequence of childhood trauma of various sorts. I think the existentialist take on that is more accurate, which is that life in and of itself is sufficiently harsh and full of betrayal and other forms of malevolence to cause any number of psychological diseases and produce any amount of aberrant behavior. So I don't think it has to be, it's not as if we all had childhoods without trauma that we would have grown up to be perfect adults. That's also a disguised form of Rousseauian philosophy, and the Rousseau's philosophy is people are basically good, but culture makes them evil. And that's not true. People are basically good and evil, and culture fortifies the possibility of both, adds strength to the possibility of both. So I think that people are sometimes damaged in childhood in ways that need to be addressed in adulthood, but that there are plenty of other reasons for psychological and physical disorder. Genetic causes, causes related to all sorts of physical diseases. No, it's way too simple. It's way too simple a hypothesis. And it's caused an awful lot of trouble because a lot of simple-minded therapists always assume that if someone is having psychological problems in adulthood, it must be because they had childhood trauma. And everybody has an unhappy childhood to some degree, so you can always find something. And often the childhood trauma that they're looking for has to be sexual. And so they dig and dig until they find or often invent something that, allows a single causal attribution. And it's just, life just isn't that simple, man. There's lots of reasons to be ill. Way more reasons to be ill than to be healthy. So, what if the truth could unravel your entire life? Yeah, well, first of all, it would. And second, yeah, I know what you mean. You mean, what if, I suppose that a cardinal case there would be that you did something really terrible, and that if that was revealed, it would be a catastrophic situation. It's like, without knowing the details of that, I can't provide a generic answer. I think that there are some sins that are so egregious that you don't get to confess to them. Like if you've done something terrible, and I'm not recommending this, it's just an example. If you've done something terrible and you know that if you revealed it, it would blow the lives of many people around you apart, it isn't obvious to me that you have any moral justification for confessing just to free your miserable soul. So, what if the truth could unravel your entire life? Well, maybe you need to go to Catholic confession and let someone know exactly what happened so you're clear about it. And then maybe what you need to do is to swear to whatever God you worship that you're going to try to walk the straight and narrow from here on in, and that'll be sufficient to atone for whatever terrible thing that you did. And that's a form of prayer, and it sounds like one that you desperately need, at least in principle. So without knowing the details, that's about the best I can do.
So you make the knowledge deep, and deep knowledge changes people and wakes them up. The only reason that I ever got convinced that good and evil were real, more real than anything else, wasn't because I learned that good was real. That's hard. That's hard. It's hard to learn that. You have to find examples of transcendent good, They're rare. Evil, all you have to do is look. You read history a bit. And read it like it's about you. And there's no way that you can do that without a transformation. But people won't do it. It's like, you want to imagine yourself as an Auschwitz guard? That's a rough thing, you see, because you have to figure out. See, Jung said if you confronted the shadow, which was the dark side of people, the aggressive side, the malevolent side, that it really reaches all the way down to hell. And Dante sort of was trying to put forward the same thing when he wrote the Inferno, right, with the levels of evil, right, because it was a voyage through the levels of evil right to the bottom. He thought the bottom was betrayal. It's pretty good. The center of malevolence is betrayal. I like that because to betray someone, you have to get them to trust you, and trust is a moral virtue, right, especially if it's courageous trust, because it puts you in alignment with other people and allows you to move forward into life. And if you betray that, it's like a knife in the heart through the back, especially if it's someone who loves you, betrays you, and especially if they betray you for your virtues. That's a really nice twist. So I believe, because I think that people are capable of good, that if they know enough about evil, that will straighten them out. So, but who wants that? You know, this is one of the things I really like about Jung. He's often regarded as a New Age thinker. That's wrong. He's no New Age thinker. He knew that the pathway to enlightenment was barred by the necessity of a passage through hell. And that no one was going to do that. That's why there isn't a world full of enlightened people, you might say. Like if it was just a matter of doing nice things, following your bliss, let's say, however you might put it, then why wouldn't everyone walk up the stairway to heaven? That isn't how it works. That's not how it works at all. I don't think you can be convinced of the necessity for moral action until you understand exactly how dark and terrible things can get, and that it's your fault that they're getting that way. Who wants to think that? So, you can think it though, but not without it burning you. Thinking about, we don't know much about consciousness. In fact, I don't think we know anything about consciousness. And obviously consciousness is something that we all share, but it's also something that we seem to also experience individually. But maybe our individual consciousnesses are something like the manifestations of something that's a more unified consciousness underneath. I mean, that's hardly an original idea, but it does seem to be the case that under some circumstances there are neurological transformations that make that link more apparent, assuming that the link exists. Now you could say, well, no, they're just producing a delusion. But the funny thing about, the funny thing about delusions is that you got to think, well, how do you know something's a delusion? And the answer to that has to be something like, well, hardly anyone else thinks it. That would be criteria number one. But criteria number two would be, if you act on the delusion, does your ship sink? Because if your ship sinks, then it was a delusion. It's something like that. But if you act on your delusion and things get better, well, then maybe it wasn't a delusion.